Hey, my name is Shashi and today I'll be introducing you to Trici, which is a desktop application which helps developers recover faster from interruptions. Now if you're a developer, then this tweet probably resonates with you. It shows what happens when a developer is interrupted for a very short duration. Before the interruption, you're working at peak productivity when you're in the zone, which goes down as you get interrupted, as you lose your train of thought, and then as you try and get back to work, it takes a certain amount of time for you to recover your train of thought and start coding productively once again. Typically, this recovery time lies anywhere between 5 and 25 minutes depending upon the type of interruption you have, how much context switching is involved, etc. Is it possible for us to reduce this recovery time and be as close to this blue line as possible? That is what Trici tries to do. Let's see how it does that. Now when you're focused and in the zone, you have a train of thought in your head corresponding to the task at hand. And whatever is the train of thought in your head, you're performing some actions on your computer or laptop. Thus, whatever you see on your computer screen, whether it is checking documentation or writing code, corresponds to the train of thought in your head at that point of time. So is the reverse also true? That is, if you lose a train of thought in your head because of an interruption, and if I show you what exactly were you working on, does it help to remember your train of thought faster? And the answer to that is yes. That is the premise upon which Trici is based. Now let's see a quick demo of the Trici application itself. I'll bring up the Trici app using the shortcut Ctrl+Shift+K or Command+Shift+K if you're on the Mac. This is the main Trici window, and you can use this shortcut to show and hide Trici as and when you please. In Trici, what you do is you start a focus session. Now when you start a focus session, Trici starts recording your screen activity as well as blocking sites which can be distracting. So if you have a tendency to go and check your Twitter feed when your code is compiling, then access to that is blocked and you will not get distracted. Whenever I start a focus session, what I do is I specify which task I'm working on. Trici has an inbuilt to-do list where you can add tasks that you want to work upon. So let's say I want to work upon make demo video, or I can even specify a task from here itself. So let's say I want to work on a task called change DB schema. I can add notes about this task. So that may involve, that particular task may involve change DB schema in DB, change data access objects, and change UI layer. So typically this was something that I used to write in Notepad, but now I write it in Trici. And I can pin this, so this is sort of like a subtask that I use. Now the session is on and I can go ahead and hide Trici and go ahead and continue with whatever work that I'm doing. So let's say I want to just change a README file. And I want to remove these two lines. And then I'll just check that in. And when I check this in, this will appear in the timeline of Trici. So what do I mean by that? So let's look at a previous focus session. So say while I was working on something, I wanted to see what I had done previously. So let's say I wanted to check what did I do on a particular task on the 3rd of January. So I look at the focus session for that particular date. And if I go to this particular focus session, for example, I can see that on the right hand side, I have the recording of the focus session. And on the left hand side, I have a timeline of the focus session, which shows that I started working on this particular task. And then I added this to do, and then I added this comment. And then I started working again on some other task. The benefit of this timeline is that if I click on this particular comment, for example, and if you notice, the video went to that particular point of the focus session. So let's say you have an hour-long focus session and you don't want to review the whole session, you can just jump to that section which you don't remember by clicking on that event in the timeline on the left-hand side. Now, let's say I end this session right now. So after ending the session, this is giving me, I can start a new session again from here, but this is showing me my previous session. And before starting the next session, typically I may want to review what I did. So I just play a quick review of the session and I can see all the things I did in the previous session. And watching this makes me immediately recover my train of thought. I can see exactly what I was doing, and these visual cues are very helpful in helping us remember what we were doing exactly. So I can go and view the details of this particular focus session, which was my last focus session. And as you can see over here, the git commit itself is now shown in this focus session, right? So if I click on this, it will go to that point where I committed the changes. So how did this happen? That is because in Trici you can specify which git repositories to track. So you can go to settings and click on track git repos, and you can specify a git repository to track. And then if there are any commits in that git repository during that focus session, it will pull those up. You can also specify which sites to block when the focus session is on, as well as whether you always want to record a focus session or you want Trici to prompt you to whether you want to record or not. So these are some of the things. You also have a daily focus time target. So with Trici, what happens is that if you leave your desk and you go away and you become inactive, Trici will automatically stop the focus session. Thus, whatever is the time tracked by Trici is a good measure of your actual focus time. So if you want to track how much focus time you actually spent, you can set a target and track it as well. So that is a very simple and quick demo of Trici, and we hope that you find it useful. Thank you.